I was the only deaf student in class. They mocked my voice, and one girl whispered, "She shouldn't even be here." Years later, the school invited me back to speak. As I stepped up to the stage with the interpreter, her eyes widened when she realized who the auditorium was named after. I grew up in a small town outside of St. Louis, place called Fenton. If you know, you know. I was born hearing, but when I was 2, I got meningitis. The doctors did everything they could, but in the end, the fever took my hearing. My parents were devastated. They didn't know sign language. They didn't know what to do with a deaf kid in a town like ours. They were both high school teachers, old school, real pull yourself up by the bootstraps types. They put me in speech therapy, got me a cochlear implant when I was 5, and decided I'd go to regular school like everybody else. That's where the problems started. From the minute I walked into kindergarten, it was clear I didn't belong, at least not to them. I didn't talk like the other kids. My voice was different. Slower, flatter, robotic. I knew it. I could feel their eyes on me every time I tried to speak. Some kids would giggle. Some would just stare. But it was the whispers that really got me. She talks funny. Why does she sound like that? Is she stupid or something? It wasn't just the kids either. The teachers would try to include me, but they were clueless. They'd talk while facing the board, or they'd say, "Never mind, it's not important," when I asked them to repeat. Then there was her. Madison. Blonde hair, perfect handwriting, teacher's pet, always in the front row. In 2nd grade, we were lining up for music class when she leaned over to the girl behind me and whispered, "She shouldn't even be here." I felt it like a punch. I didn't even have to hear her words perfectly. I could read the disgust on her face, the way she sneered when I tried to join their group projects. That look stayed with me for years. By 5th grade, I hated going to school. Hated it. Every day was the same. Kids would mock my voice. They'd cup their hands over their mouths and babble nonsense when I tried to talk. In the cafeteria, they'd swap seats to avoid sitting near me. I remember once, Madison asked the teacher if I could be in a special class so she didn't have to be in a group with me anymore. The teacher laughed. That was the moment it really sank in, I was on my own. Middle school was hell. By then, I stopped trying to fit in. I'd sit in the back of the class, pretend I didn't care. But I did. Every time they'd whisper to each other, I knew they were talking about me. Every time I caught them staring, I'd feel that hot flush of shame crawl up my neck. And the worst part? Nobody helped. Not the teachers. Not the principal. My parents tried, but they didn't really understand. They'd say stuff like, "Just ignore them. You're smart. You'll rise above it." Easy for them to say. The one thing that kept me going was books. I'd spend hours in the library, reading, writing, escaping. It was the only place I felt like I belonged. I started writing essays about what it felt like to be deaf in a hearing world, what it felt like to be invisible. I never showed anyone those essays. Not yet. High school came, and I kept my head down. I did my work. I avoided everyone. But something changed when I joined the debate team. I couldn't speak as fast as the others, but when I wrote my speeches, I crushed. My coach noticed. She told me, "You've got a voice, you just have to find how to use it." That stuck with me. By senior year, I was editor of the school paper. Still an outsider, but at least I had a space where my words mattered. And Madison? She was still there. Still blonde, still perfect, still surrounded by her little pack of girls. But by then, I could see the cracks. She wasn't as untouchable as she looked. Her grades were slipping. She wasn't the center of attention anymore. After graduation, I got out of Fenton as fast as I could. I went to Gallaudet University in D.C., the school for the deaf and hard of hearing. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the only one who signed. I wasn't the only one with an implant. I wasn't the weird one. I was just me. I thrived there. I learned deaf culture, deaf pride. I got a degree in education and then a master's in special ed. I wanted to go back and help kids like me, kids who didn't fit, who felt small, who were made to feel less than. Years later, almost 10 years after I graduated high school, I got an email from the principal of my old school. They were doing a big alumni event, and they wanted me to come speak. They said they'd heard about my advocacy work, my research on inclusive education, and how I'd started a program for deaf students across Missouri. At first, I almost deleted the email. Why the hell would I ever want to go back to that place? But then, something inside me shifted. I realized this was my moment. My chance to show them all that I wasn't the kid they used to ignore, or laugh at, or pity. I was something else now. So I said yes. And when I walked into that auditorium, holding my interpreter's arm, I froze. My name was on the wall. Big, bold letters. The Danielle Harper Auditorium. It hit me like a punch to the chest. And when I stepped onto that stage, I saw her. Madison. Sitting in the third row, next to the PTA moms, her hair darker now, but her face the same. And the moment her eyes locked on the sign above the stage, her mouth dropped open. I watched the recognition dawn in her face. Watched the shock, the disbelief, the shame. It was delicious. I gripped the podium, took a deep breath, and looked out over that sea of faces, some familiar, some new, all staring at me. I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. I gripped the podium, my heart hammering so loud I swore they could hear it through the microphone. My interpreter stood to the side, hands moving gracefully as I signed, but I barely noticed. My eyes were locked on her. Madison's face. She was frozen, her eyes wide, her mouth slightly open. She looked like she'd just seen a ghost. I could feel the tension ripple through the crowd. A few people in the front row whispered to each other. Some looked confused, glancing from the sign above the stage to me. I swallowed hard, but I kept my voice steady. My name is Danielle Harper, I began, signing alongside my words, and I am honored to stand here today, in the very school where I once sat, silent, small, and ignored. My words echoed across the auditorium, bouncing off the walls, the same walls that used to trap me in silence. I saw Madison shift in her seat, her hands clenched in her lap. The PTA moms next to her, maybe her friends, maybe not, looked at her with curious glances. Like they were putting the pieces together. I didn't stop. I was the only deaf kid in this school for years. The only one. I sat in classrooms where teachers would talk with their backs turned, where students whispered behind my back. I was mocked for how I spoke, for how I signed, for how I was. There were a few gasps. I could see one of my old teachers, Mr. Preston, the history teacher, shift uncomfortably in his seat. I used to sit in this very room, I said, motioning around, watching assemblies, wondering if anyone would ever say something that made me feel like I mattered. Wondering if anyone would ever tell the kids like me that we belong here. I could see people starting to squirm. Madison's face flushed bright red. She looked down at her lap, her nails digging into her palms. I kept going. But today, I said, my voice getting stronger, I'm here to tell you, we do belong. Kids like me, kids who are different, we have a place. And we have a voice, even if it doesn't sound like yours. The applause started slow, just a few claps, but it grew. People were standing up. I saw some teachers nodding, even a few wiping their eyes. But Madison? She stayed seated, arms crossed, her jaw tight. I wasn't done. After the speech, they had a reception in the gym. I tried to slip out quietly, I didn't want the small talk, but the principal stopped me. Danielle, he said, can I introduce you to some of the students? I nodded, even though I was exhausted. I stood there, meeting kids, some hearing, some with hearing aids, a few signing shyly. Their faces were bright, hopeful, and I felt something crack open inside me. That's when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned. It was her. Madison. She looked older. Tired. Her makeup wasn't perfect anymore, her hair a little frizzed. There were lines around her eyes I didn't remember. "Danielle," she said, her voice tight. I didn't know you'd be here." I stared at her. My interpreter hovered, ready. I signed for her to wait. "I didn't know the auditorium was named after you," she added quickly, like it would explain the way she was squirming. I just nodded. "Yeah. It is." She looked around, clearly uncomfortable. Then she leaned in, voice low. "I just wanted to say. I was young. We were kids. It was stupid, what we did." I stared at her. No apology. Just that. "I've got to get back to my daughter," she muttered, glancing toward the crowd. I followed her gaze. A little girl, maybe 7, was tugging at her sleeve. And it hit me. "Her daughter goes here now." Before I could respond, she walked away, her shoulders stiff, her back straight, but her face was burning red. I stood there for a second, taking it all in. My name on the wall. The kids who'd come up to thank me. The teachers who had ignored me all those years, now shaking my hand like I was some sort of celebrity. And Madison, looking small for the first time in her life. I wasn't done. Not yet. Because the next week, I got an email from the principal. He asked if I'd come back and help lead a new inclusivity program they were launching. A long-term program. They wanted to train teachers, develop curriculum, and start a mentorship program for deaf and hard of hearing students. They wanted me to lead it. And I said yes. I had ideas. Big ones. And I knew exactly where to start. Madison's daughter? She was in the same grade I had been when Madison whispered that I didn't belong. I was going to make sure she never felt like I did. And Madison was going to watch every single step of it. The next few months were a whirlwind. I went back to my old school every week to lead workshops, train teachers, and mentor students. The inclusivity program wasn't just a side project. It became the main project. I stood in front of teachers who used to ignore me, Mr. Preston, Ms. Carter, even the old principal, and taught them how to communicate with deaf students. I showed them how to sign. I explained what it felt like to be left out. I told them about Madison, without saying her name, and how one whispered sentence could burn itself into a kid's brain forever. They nodded, awkwardly. Some of them apologized, some even cried. But it didn't matter. They'd had their chance. Now, I was the one in charge. The school hired interpreters full-time. They built a dedicated resource room for deaf students. And they invited me to cut the ribbon at the opening ceremony. Madison was there, of course. She had no choice, her daughter was in the program now. Every time we crossed paths, she'd give me this tight little smile, like she wanted to say something but couldn't quite get the words out. But then, one afternoon, I saw her waiting outside the principal's office, looking pissed. I overheard just enough. Her daughter, Lily, wasn't doing well. Struggling with reading, falling behind in math. Madison wanted her moved to a different class, away from the distractions. That's when I realized Madison was trying to pull the same crap she used to pull on me. So I did something about it. I scheduled a meeting with the principal, the teachers, and Madison. I sat across from her in the conference room, her face tight, her arms crossed, and laid out a plan for Lily. A plan that included extra support, yes. But also, full participation in the inclusivity program. Lily would have a deaf mentor, me. She'd learn basic ASL. She'd stay in the diverse classroom. Madison opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't let her. Your daughter deserves better than the isolation you tried to put me in, I said. My interpreter signed it perfectly, every word hitting her like a slap. And I won't let you do it to her. She stared at me like she'd swallowed a lemon. And the principal? He nodded. Danielle's right, he said. We're sticking to the plan. Madison didn't speak. She just sat there, her face red, her eyes flashing. But it wasn't over. Because the school's board invited me to speak at the district-wide teacher training day. Hundreds of teachers from all over the county gathered in the same auditorium with my name on the wall. I stood there, telling my story, every ugly detail. The whispers. The mocking. The silence. The teachers who let it happen. The girl who whispered that I shouldn't be here. I didn't name Madison. But everyone in the room who knew. Madison sat in the back, her face pale, watching the room turn on her. And the next week? Her husband, the PTA dad, the guy who ran a local insurance company, filed for divorce. Word got out. Turns out, he didn't like the way she treated their daughter either. He left her. Sold the house. Took Lily with him. I heard Madison moved into a small apartment outside of town. She quit the PTA. And Lily? Lily stayed in the program. She kept learning sign language. She sent me a card that said, "Thank you for making a place for me." As for me? I kept going. I started a statewide program for deaf students. I published my essays. I gave talks all over the country. And every time I stepped on stage, I remembered that little girl who sat alone at lunch, staring at her tray, feeling like she didn't belong. That girl was me. And now? I own that stage. The last time I walked into that auditorium, my auditorium, I stood under the sign with my name on it, looked out at the crowd, and knew, without a doubt, I wasn't just here. I belonged. And no one would ever tell me otherwise again. Not Madison. Not anyone.